Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at this interview of Magnify Our Impact. And today I'm with Ollie Belcher, who's a real inspiration. Ollie runs an amazing charity in northern India, which helps so many women to help their communities over there, and it's truly inspirational. But before we get into that, Ollie has an MSc distinction in geography and first to Oxford University, so she's an incredibly bright lady academically, but also after her university degree she went into the world of business, which I'm sure she's going to tell you about, to get herself a real grounding from a cognitive perspective but also a skills perspective before she opened her wonderful charity that's named Shivia. With no further ado, I'd love to introduce Ollie to you. And Ollie, thank you first of all for giving us this time, because I know that at the moment with the corona pandemic, you know, what we think is challenging, I know we were just talking about this, what I think is challenging here in the UK right now for us to be able to navigate this terrible virus. In India, there's, you know, challenges that are challenging over, you know, like you just said, 1.37 billion people, I think, over there. So if we think it's difficult to be able to be creative and support people with the most need in England right now, you know, to be able to do it like you have right now with a lockdown in India is a major achievement just in itself. But overall, you've done so much great work. So give us an indication of where you came from. I know you've got an inspirational backstory before you started the charity, and then let us know where you are today.
Well, thank you, Craig, for that very generous introduction. So a little bit of history about where I came from. My father was brought up in Calcutta, which is the main city of West Bengal, northeast India, where we now work for Shivia. And my grandfather was very instrumental in helping support Mother Teresa's first home. At the time in Calcutta, there was a big leprosy issue. And so he helped gather, you know, small funds to open one of her first clinics called the Olivia-Olly Dispensary. And actually he was responsible for providing her with her first ever ambulance. So I was brought up with these wonderful stories told by my father to me of how he spent his days with Mother Teresa and his father, you know, doing things like giving her her first ambulance. And I found those really inspiring. And because I'm very close to my dad, I really wanted to go out and see Calcutta and see where he'd been brought up and put these stories to life. So my first real opportunity to go out for a significant amount of time was the year in between school and university. And I actually wanted to go and work for the missionary charities and Mother Teresa set up. But she said to me, no, don't come to me. I'm in the city. I now have so many volunteers, because by this point she was a big figure. Why don't you go and work for a friend of mine, Casey Thomas, who runs a home for abused and abandoned children in a village about 60 miles north of Calcutta called Familiar Home. And I thought, great, let's do it. So I went off as aged 18 and arrived in rural Bengal, actually hoping that someone would be there to collect me, because it'd all been organized about a year before over fax, but they were there. And I lived in the villages of Bengal for many months and just helped, you know, with the children, and they were all abused and abandoned, and helped teach them English, and I absolutely loved it. But one of the things that really inspired me to start up Shivia was that Familiar Home ran these outreach services into the villages for the poor communities surrounding them. And I joined some of the women's empowerment sessions, and by then I picked up some of the local language. And I was really struck how these women really wanted to work, but they couldn't because of cultural reasons, but also because they lacked access to finance and to skills they could commoditize. So that was the seed for Shivia. So when I returned to Oxford University, I actually really didn't return because I just loved it so much where I was, but I did come back. I decided to base my undergraduate theses back in West Bengal, trying to really look into the issues of why these communities were so poor, and also how their husbands went to the city to try and earn money and send it back to them, and just the circular economies going on. And then I went on to do my master's to look into the issue a bit further, and continued exploring the same theme. And I think I ended up coming to the conclusion that that if we could provide these families with small amounts of money, they could start up little businesses and work from home, which is really at the same time that the beginning of the microfinance initiative as we know it today. So then after my research, I was absolutely dead set on starting Shivia. And my dad, who, as I've told you, I was very close to, said to me, you can't possibly start up an organization giving people finance and skills if you have neither yourself. So I slightly reluctantly took the advice, but I'm glad with hindsight that I did. And I went to work at the World Bank in Washington, DC, where I got a really good training experience and a very good network in international development issues. But it still wasn't enough to really start up an organization, because I think you need some kind of business skills to do so. And so Dad said, hold your horses, put your brakes on, and go and get some experience in the city, because you need to run a charity like a business, not from the heart. And if you're going to be pitching for funds, you need to be able to speak the language of businesses. So I joined Accenture Strategy in London, and I have to say they were absolutely fantastic and very supportive. They knew my plan from the beginning, and they allowed me to work full-time for, I think, 2 years or so, and then to go part-time so I could start up Shivia alongside the strategy work, which was necessary for paying rent and bills, but also continuing to learn basic skills like budgets, business plans, Excel, PowerPoint, which have all proved to be extremely useful in the running and planning of Shivia. So I was finally able to set it up in 2008, so 12 years ago now.
And there's so much there, but and I want to ask you where you are now. But before I do that, there is what I've already learned from this interview, which I didn't do, which seems super intelligent. Is, I suppose there's two sides to us. There's our head and our heart. Well, people say head, heart, gut, but there's our head and our heart. And most of us do just dive into something with our heart, like I did, and there is a passion behind that. You need. My dad actually at university said that the heart is the wind in your sails that takes you along, but the mind is the rudder that keeps you straight ahead. So we have some very clever fathers. So I'd love to ask you two questions all at the same time, which is, well, tell us more about where you are now and the amazing work that you're doing now, because for everybody listening to this that's running a charity, a social enterprise, a community interest company, or indeed, still, very much involved in the commercial world, I know there'd be people listening to this that are thinking about how can they help the world. Some people are where you were, when you were 18, 19, or want to do something, or some of us have just perhaps finished our commercial careers and at any age and want to make a difference. So tell us about your story as you've built this charity, but also please tell us about what you feel are the biggest I know you've had many, but what are the biggest learnings and the biggest successes that you've had along the way while you've been building this amazing charity?
So when we started, we didn't have the licenses to operate in India, and you need quite a few licenses to do what we do and where we do it, and it takes a long time, especially if you're not going to pay any bribes or oil the system. So it comes down to patience. But we didn't want to sit around waiting for 3 years doing nothing. So initially we started working with local NGOs who I happen to know, and we started more along the lines of microfinance. Back to what I was saying, small amounts of money to start up businesses. But after 2 or 3 years, I didn't really feel that the impact was big enough to justify the effort. There were a few good stories, but when we looked a little bit deeper, I found that you know, a lot of the women weren't starting up businesses where they were getting themselves out of poverty. Often when the loan officers turned their backs, the men took the money anyway. And I found it just wasn't really what we set out to do. So I said at that point, everybody stop. Let's acknowledge why it's not working and work out what is going to work. And we basically realized that one of the biggest problems of all was that there wasn't a market demand for the products these ladies were making. So they were weaving baskets, but they couldn't sell them because the quality wasn't good enough, or they were making balaposh, which like quilts, without realizing there was a quilt making factory down the road, you know, the small things. So we did a whole year's worth of research, and we tried to address all the pitfalls of microfinance, and ended up basically turning the model on its head.
That's fascinating to me is that, you know, you had some real wisdom there, because so many of us just carry on. And so can you talk through the moment or the time when you turned around and said, hold on, we've got a vision here, we've got a business plan, we've got a plan to help these ladies, and it's not where I want it to be? Was there a meeting or a day, or did you wake up one Monday morning and say, actually this isn't working? Or what happened? Because that, I think what you've just hit on is what makes you know, businesses and charities unique, is somebody, a leader, turning around and saying, okay, we're going to be patient here, and we're going to do some serious research, and we're going to make this better. What was the fire, what was the spark that allowed you to do that?
So I remember the moment actually really well, because at the time microfinance was all over the media. You had Muhammad Yunus, and the UN had declared it in 2008 as being the magic wand of poverty alleviation. It was all very exciting, and there was a massive wave behind it of positivity.
Yes.
And I wanted to believe the wave myself, because we were doing it, and we had a lot of people interested in working with us because of it, and they liked our authentic approach, etc. And there's one organization, which I'll keep anonymous just in case I don't know if they want to be mentioned, I'm not sure. And they had given us a substantial amount of funding over a 3-year period. And for the first 2 years, they were really happy with the reports, and they were very excited. I was on my way to collect the third and final check, which was £50,000.
Okay.
There was 50 a year for 3 years, which as a startup charity
was
a good amount of funding.
Money, yeah.
And I was on my way to their offices, and I thought, I can't accept this money, because they think we're making a much bigger impact than I know we are.
Right.
And I remember walking in, there was this massive check, because it wasn't just the check, it turned into some kind of ceremony, you know, and it was with all their, you know, lots of people there, and
yes,
photos and good news stories, and and they were, and I just remember thinking, you know, I just got to be honest here with them, and I'm actually with the communities we're meant to be working with, because I don't think we're actually doing them a favor by lending them smaller amounts of money, because they're actually getting into debt is really what's happening. And just before we went in, I remember just that sunny feeling, maybe it's Catholic guilt, become a Catholic or something, but I couldn't accept it. So I said to them, you know, I got a slight problem here, because we really want the funding, but I know we're not making the impact that you think we're making, or that I hoped we were making. And they looked absolutely astonished. And he said, oh goodness, well, what do you mean? And we had this long meeting. And at the end of the meeting, he said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, the best thing you can do is give us half that money, give the other half to another charity, because we only need half. So we can do a year of research using all the evidence we've got of why it's not working and what we can do to make it work. Because we're not going to be handing out loans. We don't need the credit. We just need the manpower. And they said, fine. And it was the best thing we could have done, actually, with hindsight. And I just think it was this wave of guilt that, you know, I always felt like we were tricking people into believing we were doing a good job, and I knew we weren't. That was what it was.
Wow.
And And I was so grateful for their flexibility with the funding,
Yes.
them still backing us, for them putting money into research, because a lot of funders don't want to put money into core costs, research, development. They wanted them to operational impact, so they can say we've helped this number of families. So I was very grateful that they allowed us to do the research, and actually what it enabled was us to hit on our poultry model, which is our biggest thing today, which is a model whereby the market demand for poultry in India is huge. Most people eat chickens and eggs, whatever your religion, Muslim, Hindu, where we work. The women can do it from home. If they can't sell the produce, at least they can consume it. They can do it alongside other enterprises. And best of all, it's either an enterprise where they can expand a poultry enterprise, because we give them a small toolkit at the beginning of 10 one-day-old chicks, feed, vaccinations, medication, and training for 6 months, so they can build that enterprise. Or they can gain confidence, knowledge, skills about how to run an enterprise and use that to set up something else altogether. But they understand by then the concepts of market demand, of saving money, of reinvesting, all these principles we teach them. So I think that year of recognizing we shouldn't just be flogging a dead horse, recognizing that it wasn't working, and I suppose having the bravery of saying, look, swallow a bit of humble pie, just accept it's not working, was a good call.
Sounds like a great call in the end. So there's so many lessons in that. But from a values perspective, I can imagine what you learned from that and what you understood about yourself. And I'm trying, not to give you those words, because I'd love to hear what your view is. But what was your biggest learning from being that authentic? What did you get from that? And what did you learn about your own career from having the courage of making that decision?
I think I learned that honesty is always the best policy, because people actually ultimately respect it.
Yes.
I think I learned that, one of the things we did at the time was, we were quite a small team then. We're now a team of about 70 of us between the UK and India, but at the time we were a team of just 3 or 4 of us. And there's certainly in the Indian culture, often they want to tell you what you want to hear rather than what's necessarily right. Yeah. So it was just at that very early point encouraging people just to always tell me honest feedback rather than what they thought I wanted to hear, and saying, I can't run this from 6,000 miles away. I need to empower you to really run this. So you've got to always be honest. And because we're working with people's lives, it's even more important. So just creating a value system within Shivia of being open, transparent, honest, recognizing what we are doing well and building on that, but equally importantly, recognizing what we're not doing well and either rectifying that or saying, look, let's just don't waste any more time, resource, effort, money on something that's not working, because in the charity world especially, resources are very limited and you've got to use them extremely wisely. So just constantly checking and not being ashamed if something's not working, but recognizing when it's not and dealing with it quickly.
And so you mentioned now that you have a team of 70 people, and I'd love to find out what do you believe creates a winning culture within your teams? What's grown your team to be this authentic? You mentioned transparency, openness, honesty.
So make it very clear, really understand in your mind what kind of people you're looking for to fill the different positions you need to best run an organization. And when people join, just be really clear about the values you want in that organization. So, in Shivia, the absolute priority is our mission, helping people to create their own livelihoods and get themselves out of poverty. That's at the core of what we do. So if you don't believe in that, or if you're joining us because you want, a a cushy job on a nice salary, we're not the organization for you. So it's really trying to make sure people understand that they're joining us to help people. That's the core, that's number one priority. So it's a culture, it's an organization of people who are absolutely dedicated to the cause. And that comes through at every level, from the leadership down to the field staff. Or I should say the field staff up to the leadership, because the field staff are the most important people in the organization. The ones out there doing the job every day, and their dedication is unbelievable. So I think that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is, and might go into the second part of your question, if you're trying to change a culture, just communicating all the time, encouraging communication. So, and always, and treating everybody the same. So I would encourage, especially in India, where there's a bit of a command and control structure and a bit of a hierarchy structure, just saying, just because you're at the top, you're no more important. Actually, you're probably less important because you're not the ears on the ground. Constantly listening to people, constantly engaging them, making them feel important, because they are important, and just being open and treating everybody the same. And I really believe in recognizing everyone's efforts, not necessarily financially, but every year we hold an award ceremony in India, and we recognize the staff not on things like necessarily how many toolkits have you distributed, but those who have trained the most families, and those who have celebrated their families best, and those who have really gone above and beyond in whatever way, and they get a little trophy, and it sits in their houses, and they're incredibly proud of it. So it's also it's just recognizing people and their efforts.
Yes, that sounds like it'd be a great evening.
It's fun. So they come because we have 5 locations around Calcutta, or within 100 kilometers of Calcutta, and the ceremony is held at our oldest location, and they all get up at 3 in the morning to get there, and there are about 60 of the field staff come, and there's a huge sense of anticipation about who's going to win an award, and it's wonderful because it means all the teams are together from all the different locations. We use it as an opportunity for them to share lessons and learnings about what's working in their location, what isn't. How did you address this? How did you learn from this? So we have a big team sharing. And then it's also a chance for me to say, how can we help you to do your job better?
There's this word of sustainability often gets banded around an enormous amount. And I'd love to hear your view on what sustainability means. Do you now feel that you are sustainable for the future? And if so, what does sustainability truly mean on the ground?
But if we're talking about the beneficiaries, our absolute goal is to make them sustainable so that they're independent of us and aren't reliant on us anymore. So with the poultry, we ensure that after 3 or 4 years, they can operate a poultry enterprise entirely independently of us. So they are financially sustainable and sustainable in running a poultry model where they can do it completely on their own. And that is our absolute goal. And I'm just delighted that the data and numbers coming out of that is showing that is now happening. Many of our discussions in Shivia to board level and at a management level about how do we make sure people are not reliant on us, that they will be independent of us. So if we ever stop for some reason, they can stand on their own 2 feet and they've got themselves out of poverty and continue. So that's one thing. In terms of the sustainability of Shivia as an organisation, we, for example, the poultry toolkits, we provide them at a subsidised level. So they do pay a little bit towards them. And that helps with our own financial sustainability. A toolkit of 10 one-day-old chicks, vaccinations, medication and training costs £15 to supply, and they contribute about £5 towards that. It makes them really look after the toolkits because they've it, and B, it does mean that it helps us recover some of the money and helps us to therefore provide more toolkits elsewhere.
And so you mentioned a couple of times about fundraising, and obviously this is right now we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, and there's a number of different, a huge percentage, I'd say, of charities and social enterprises around the world that are now looking at being really challenged with their fundraising. And so it'd be great to understand your advice as to how to fundraise, any tips and advice that you've got as to how to fundraise, and, you know, how to think big about sustainability and about how you can help people in the world. You know, and I know there's many, many different ways in which we can raise funds, but I'd love to hear your advice and your thoughts on what's most important for a fundraiser to become successful.
Yeah, so I think that unfortunately for charities, a lot of fundraising revolves around events and face-to-face meetings, and both of which aren't possible at the moment.
No.
And I don't think large-scale events are going to be possible for quite a long time. You know, things like the London Marathon, for example, raises millions of pounds for charities every year. But there are events going up and down this country and up and all over the globe all the time, raising money for charity. I also know that, you know, that for charity fundraising, a lot of it's about the energy and emotion. It's emotional giving a lot of the time. So you meet the team and you can instill a sense of confidence and trust in people, they're more likely to part with their money, and that's not possible either right now. So I think as charities, we're going to have to think long and hard about how we raise funds in the absence of the two biggest fundraising tools of the past. And you know, I think we're just all going to have to get better at digital campaigns, basically trying to inspire people digitally instead of in person. And that can be maybe by, you know, I don't know, social media channels, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, stories, you know, putting out stories, showing videos, and just trying to engage people with you know, how some people are living, and trying to, you know, I think one thing about the coronavirus is we all cannot deny is it's a global pandemic.
Yes.
You know, it shows that we now live in a global village. So there's none of this. I don't think this sort of national, you know, I'm going to give to just my doorstep can be relevant to global to COVID-19. We are in a global world, and we have spread this disease. People traveling around have spread this disease. So I think that, you know, fundraisers for whether it's local charities or national charities or international charities are just going to have to say to people, we all have to reassess our value system. We all have to reassess how we've been living. We've all been charging around for far too long. And, you know, let's get back. Let's get back. And charities have to encourage that message. And the way they're going to have to do it is by, you know, well, you said you joined our webinar last week, engaging people through technology and digital channels.
And what's the difference these days, Ollie, between a commercial business and yourselves?
In the way we're structured, do you mean?
Well, in the way that, you know, because there's been so much talk in our sector in international development that we as charities, we as social enterprises need to think more like commercial businesses. You know, and you know, you've come from Oxford University, you're extremely bright academically, you've had a commercial background, you now have absolutely earned your place with regards to understanding international development. So you have all three of those experiences. So when you combine all of those, you know, you've worked hard for it, you're not lucky, but you now have an understanding and combine all those three different elements, which is really powerful. Just give us an understanding of what's out of those three elements, out of the strategy and the academics, the intelligence, the knowledge, the research that we have to do before we start a charity, and the commercial side and the charity heart side. You know, do we have to combine them all, or do we need to be more academic these days? Do we need to be more business focused? Do we need to be more charity focused? Or just give us an idea of what you think about that.
Well, I mean, I think that whether you're a charity or any organization, you have to run it in a business-like way to be effective. You know, I think unless you can set yourself a business plan and targets, you don't know what you're working towards. So unless you can, you know, if you just set up out of the goodness of your heart and started just trying to help a few people here and there, it's an organic approach. We're going to get to a point where you're going to say, I can't take people's money unless I'm accountable for it. So you've got to be able to tell people what you're setting out to achieve so they can give you money, and then you can account for that money you've spent. So you have to start working in a business-like way. So I think it's absolutely, and in charities, you've got your governance side, and then you've got your money, so your fundraising side, and then you've got your operational side, you've got your three buckets. And I think corporate governance is absolutely crucial for any charity, as it is for any business. I think you need to have an extremely strong board of directors who ultimately take responsibility for that funding and how you spend it, and guide the CEO or the direction of the charity. Because if you don't have a strong board of trustees or directors, the CEO can just charge off in any direction and actually waste money.
That makes a lot of sense. So from an innovation perspective, do you feel that us in what you've just reminded me is the first sector, not the third sector, do you feel that it's really important from an innovation perspective that we grow and develop product line, innovative ways to be able to create an offer, where that we can start distributing products and services that would be seen just like you would from Nike or Adidas or anybody else? I mean, do you feel that we need to start selling in a way that isn't traditional fundraising? Do you feel that we need to innovate in that way?
I think we can, and that's when you go into the social enterprise world. I mean, you were on our webinar last week, and one of the things we were talking about was that, for example, in India, everyone's being advised to wear face masks, but they're not available or they're unaffordable to the communities where we work. So we said, let's innovate. You make them. We will train you and provide you with the materials, and we will pay you a little bit, a wage, to make them. That is pure innovation, and we will be distributing those products for free amongst the communities where they can't afford them. But we're absolutely talking to businesses who also need face masks in their supply chain to sell them. And that's when you go into the social enterprise space, because you're actually creating profit, and then it doesn't go to the shareholders, it goes back to the mission. So that's why it's a social enterprise rather than a pure commercial business. But we definitely could innovate to raise funds, and also, I say more importantly than that, to come up with products which are really needed by the majority of the people in this world.
Yes.
What we have at Shivia, which we're often approached about, is the NMAR reach that many of these corporates are desperate for, but they don't have it. They can't get to that bottom 100 million people in India.
Yeah.
So they rely on organizations like that, like us, to find out this consumer demand. What is it? What do they need? Companies like Amazon and Flipkart, which is the Indian equivalent, are all desperate to get into those villages.
Yes.
They reckon. So why shouldn't charities be doing it?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think, unfortunately, unusually, I know it's taken you many years. I'm not saying you've just done it like that, but you're now in a place where a lot of your work could be deemed as sustainable. Where do you go from here? What's your vision for the future? And if you could answer this, please, as a tactical vision, so we can understand what our vision should be in other charities. In other words, what's your vision, and what do you feel a vision should look like coming out of the coronavirus?
So one of my big visions for Shivia is that to date it's been funded pretty much from the UK, even though the operations are in West Bengal. So what we've been trying to do in the last 2 or 3 years is raise money within India itself. Now it's very difficult with where West Bengal is, and the money's not there. It's on the other side of the country. And the CSR funds aren't really available where we are. But my vision is to make Shivia India, which we call locally Nurden, financially sustainable. So one day Shivia UK can just shut down because there won't be a need for us anymore. And I think that's really important for anybody running charities or social enterprise to recognize that when you set out your mission, and to recognize when job is done. Because what sometimes people do is they sort of repurpose themselves or redefine their
Yeah.
mission, and they end up suffering from mission drift and actually end up wasting quite a lot of resources. So I think that, I don't know how it's taking longer than I had hoped it would take or imagined it would take. But my hope is that within 10 years' time, Shivia India Nerdum will be so totally funded locally, and Shivia UK won't have a role at all. As we'll either close down, or what we'll do is what we have been doing is we've been developing manuals on all the operations, and we are it can either be a social franchising model where we other organizations take them and roll out our models elsewhere, which is happening already, or just share the knowledge so that other organizations aren't reinventing the wheel.
What's your overall view and the most important thing that you've learned from this amazing journey that you're on in your life? What's the biggest piece of advice that you have, or something that would wrap this whole thing up, summarize your work, if you possibly can?
I would use the word perseverance, because actually, if I listed out all the challenges we would have come up against at the beginning, I would have said it's an impossible task.
Yes.
But if you just persevere, stay true to yourself and the mission of the organization, and to your staff, and just really stick to your belief and keep going and keep checking yourself and persevering, you will get there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. It's been inspirational, Ollie. It really has. And I started a charity in West Africa, as you know, and you've just done. It's amazing the breadth of what you've done, and that you keep going. It's really amazing to watch your work and seeing the impact that you've made and the size of the impact that you've made. So congratulations to all 70 of you and everybody that's working with you. And I'm going to also put a summary where people can find you and your organization and get inspiration from everything that you've done. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Craig. It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, great talking to you. Thank you.
Okay, pleasure.